I am now happy to introduce Mary Jane Nigman.
Glad to be with you again in this conversation we're going to have. The agenda for this afternoon is strategic facilitation defined. We talked a lot about that during the online course. And addressing your real-life situations, those questions that you submitted to me over the last couple of weeks of the webinar. Suzanne Flint is with us today to respond to any library-related questions that come up. If I'm not able to answer your specific protocol needs, I know that libraries have special operations, and I'm not familiar with all of them, so I've asked Suzanne to stand by. From learnings over the last couple of weeks for me, I understand that you are already facilitators. Most of you have led groups, boards, committees, book clubs. You've served as a group leader in many, many activities. I'm sure it was hard work, but the fact is that you were facilitating and making that group's work easier. To me, facilitation skills are a system of good meeting manners and not much else. They depend a lot on your listening, responding, asking, coaching, and assisting. These activities are intuitive to most of us, and once you realize what they are, the skills will improve with use. I will let you know that when I started facilitating as a professional, I did not have any idea of the background of the people that I was working with. I didn't know about environmental issues. I had to learn all of that by listening, and I did. Meeting management is good time and organizational management, planning, tracking, keeping things on track, following up on topics, finding information. These are really what makes the group's dialogue easy. It's the strategic aspect that adds the other dimension to this project and its purpose. You're going to help folks to think long term. A watchful eye on the context of your library, noticing changes over time, following these changes to their possible outcomes, is the basis of foresight thinking. To think strategically requires helping others to grow in their awareness of those possibilities. Together with advice, the preferable options can be followed. So this is really a lot about educating others to understand what you see. There were three parts of the online, I skipped a slide here, three parts of the online course. First, we learned about the types of facilitation and how foresight informs strategic facilitation, which is the philosophy of collaborative dialogue. Reviewing group formation and the tools that you can use to inform an advisory group was the second part of the course. How you used group dynamics and outreach tools to help form a group. Then leadership based on self-awareness, commitment, and confidence is what we've worked on during the third week. Transformation requires that you step out of the box. So I've given you a form here of what I call the big picture. At the Institute and in your intentional conversations, you learn some things about midlife adults and how much this cohort has to offer your library. The path ahead, the big picture, begins with a new awareness and recognition of the changes that we all will occur and encounter. So whether you do it at the library or within the social networks that you have, demographic change is underway. The challenge is respond to a new group of library patrons in response to their needs, contributions, and interests. There were so many good ideas listed from you in your coursework. So the big picture means seeing where we are now, helping others to see where we are and could go, and defining the vision and goals together. Workable strategies will evolve based on these new priorities. I wanted to mention a few of the things that I've learned from you during the coursework and the intentional conversations that you had. One of them is that there's no labeling here with this boomer population. They don't like them one little bit. Most, if not all of you, plan to stay in touch with the people that you met during your intentional conversations. The purpose of those was to initiate the notion of midlife adults to many people in your domain and to get a sense of people's interests, views, and the prospects for new relationships with the library and the external community. Hopefully you made new acquaintances and opened the door to future relationships. What were some of the aha moments, new insights, or things that you learned during the course? Please type your comments in the text chat. Many of you commented on the changes you'll make when asking questions to give them more power and nuance. One interviewee suggested that letting the customers be the experts and leaders with gentle guidance from the library. Another observed that boomers have revolutionized every stage of life that they've been through, and they now make up a huge politically savvy voting bloc, which can be revolutionary in itself. She expects something surprising from this generation in the future. Now, Cheryl from Pullman, Washington, is visiting a family in Columbia where it's hot. Oh, she's telling me where she's from. I don't see any chat comments here. Have we not brought those in?
Some folks are mentioning the powerful, the aha moment was asking powerful questions, Mary Jane.
Mary, I don't see that on my screen. Can I have a little technical assistance here? Expanding our definition of literacy to include financial and spiritual. That's a great one. That's from Barbara. Aha moment was to take risks that we usually avoid. Yes, that's true. Sometimes you're in a what in the business world is called a silo, and you really don't think too much out of your own mental model. Well, let's get to those real-life questions. They fell into three categories. Those related internally to the library itself, to your staff, to people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. Another group were those touching on community situations, people that you met during your intentional conversations, and in the users of the library group. And then the third one that you mentioned in your questions were all those things that you're concerned about that may be barriers or limitations to your work. Some of the comments were so similar that I'll cover them together. Others are more situation specific, but they could really happen anywhere. Well, almost. I don't know how many tribal libraries we have in the fellows group, but surely that's the condition of that specific location. Just as you've listened and learned about adults 50 plus, others will need to do so too. So it may take time, patience, and evidence. You have to give people a chance to understand the significance of the issue of demographic change. Marketing the library and the vision, you may need to approach staff or supervisors individually, one by one, to share what you've learned and how excited you are about the potential for the library. You might ask to start a pilot program. This would be an experiment. Sometimes experiments are less frightening if they are thought of in the realm of let's see what happens instead of let's make something happen. If you do that, you present the idea that this is temporary, which is more acceptable, and doesn't ask for a big change quickly that seems costly, permanent, or too vague. Control may be an issue to address. If people wonder when you begin to bring up these ideas, who's the boss, then you're going to have to address the possibility that you're only bringing ideas forward and that they indeed are still the boss. What do you think you can do in your library to promote understanding of the possibilities for midlife adults? Let's hear some typing on those chat squares in there. Another question about marketing the library and the vision. With new partners, collaboration with your advisory group, some of that will occur from the grassroots up. If people get excited about what you're doing, they will spread the word, and you will not have to do the marketing. It will be word of mouth if it flies through the community. So let's hear some ideas from you on what you can do to market the library services to midlife adults. Diane's asking how to engage a group that refuses to be labeled. I think you don't engage them under a label. You engage those people as users of the library with something interesting to offer. Really give them a chance to think of themselves as boomers or anything else that's special in any way. You just talk about what their needs are. Any other questions out there? Expanding our definition of literacy. Not wanting to be labeled. Can you say a little bit more about that, Linda? One question asked by one of the administrators is, why is a specialist librarian needed for this group? There's specialists for children, there's specialists for teens. Do we need another special audience? What would you tell this woman? Keep an open mind. Repeat what's said to get them to talk more about it. Absolutely. D. DePoe, I've forgotten about the art of conversation. Well, we really all have. Something has happened to us as a condition of technology. So face-to-face is the way I generally approach the people that I work with. The idea of starting open dialogue is setting an example by doing it yourself, by not presenting boundaries around the kinds of questions that you're going to ask, by welcoming ideas, by being really open with the people that you're contacting. Any other thoughts before I move on to the next slide? Okay, we're off and running. Here's some things that I heard you say about the situations in your library. Great idea, but we really can't allocate time to that right now, maybe in the spring. Or that sounds nice, but we have to work well, but we have enough to do right now, so maybe down the road. To me, I interpret that to be death by procrastination and postponement. It's a form of resistance that comes from fear of the unknown, power or control issues, or simply not seeing the pending changes in the population. This is an opportunity for you to help them see something new. It's an opportunity to share information about the potential of newcomers to the library. If you haven't got a lot of senior boomers or non-labeled midlife adults in your community, in your library community, this is a good time to bring some of those folks in. Maybe a few more conversations with potential partners in the community would also provide a critical mass of interest from outside of the library. What are your thoughts about how to counter this type of resistance? Can you give me some ideas by typing into the chance what's worked for you before? Okay, here's a few thoughts about resistance. Change means taking risks and moving away from a comfort zone. Some people fear the unknown and others see it as a loss of power or control. Change means meeting new people. Sometimes there's a reluctance to meet new people. People are afraid of those that they're not familiar with. Or perhaps people can't see why the new status would be be needed, and they need help in actually visualizing something. Staff may resist if they feel left out. They're losing out on a new project, or if they perceive it to be more work, unrecognized and unrewarded. Include them in your discussions. Diane is asking me a question about dialogue. What is dialogue? Dialogue is two-way conversation. It's not like I'm doing right now, making all the noise. It's feedback and a flow. It reflects what you learned from those powerful questions, how to ask what, how, and why, rather than short-circuiting the discussion with yes or no conversational attempts. Staff resist if they feel left out, so you have to include them. Ask for their advice. Ask them what they're thinking. Ask them how you can help them to develop their work to include midlife adults. I'm reading from Stephen. He says, partner with existing committees and projects to include an element target at those groups. Gina Becker says, focus on activities, not on age groups. Absolutely, Gina, that's great. Jenny Brewer, I plan to issue an RFP for patron-led programming. Excellent idea. A lot of the points you all raised when you were doing your work draft plans for the course looked to me like you were relying a lot on your library staff to compose the advisory board. I would suggest that you take 1/4 library folks and then find 3/4 from outside of the library to give you that outward look that will reflect more on context than it will on content. That way you will relieve the staff that many of you have expressed being concerned about, and you'll also have an opportunity to meet new people, gather those new ideas, and perhaps form different kinds of partnerships that will help you out. Ellen Peters, she thinks social networking and emails will help marketing, along with graphics and flyers. So there she's given you a tip about how to use visual aids to help promote the ideas that you're trying to develop. Try, absolutely, Diane. Yes, try indeed. Someone here, Cheryl, says she can't wait to share the powerful questions audience with the rest of the management team. Going for the jugular questions is a totally different way of planning for us. Of all the things that we did in the online course, I think I had the most positive response from the article on powerful questions. It was the one that seemed to really shake up the thinking out there. So I'm really glad you all plan to use that as a tool. Yes, the program needs to be intriguing to adults, but you've got to find out what it is that it's intriguing to adults by asking them. Word of mouth is indeed huge. That's why I'm trying to suggest that you go outside of the group to find that advisory panel. Now, a couple of you have mentioned that your community is a little bit reluctant or apathetic. You don't know that until you ask. Don't ask the same old suspects. Find new people to engage. One says here, how to stay open to what's being said, not anticipating. That's another thing I really picked up from some of your draft work plans, is that some of you already think that you know how this is going to turn out. But until you get the group in place and begin to work with them in a really slow evolutionary way, you don't know how this is going to turn out. You're really not supposed to know the answer now. The draft work plan was a thinking tool to help you organize what you were trying to prepare for. It was to help you walk through those steps that you will walk through eventually, but the next time you do it, it will be with the real people that will help shape that, that activity for you. Think about specialty groups in town that would be interested in what you're doing, for sure. Oh, yes, patron-run programs and events, you have a built-in audience, and they'll invite their friends and family. I'm not suggesting that you neglect those, what I call the same old people, the SOPs. Do not neglect the SOPs, because then you'll alienate them. Include them, but go beyond that. Thanks for the hint on texting to me, because I haven't been seeing many comments. They're coming in now, so we've made a change here. An energetic volunteer visionary age group that you're trying to attract. Every group has special needs. I probably wouldn't use the children's programming. No, don't use children's programming for adult programs, although I think there's some techniques that might overlap. You want to tailor this to the needs of the people that you're going to call together. Keep those ideas coming. I'm really rather enjoying this than reading from my slides. How about handling those logistics? Say what you will do to handle the logistics. I am suggesting that until you get your group in place and find out who has ideas about logistics, and I'm assuming that you mean location, meeting space, that sort of thing, you won't know the answer to that until you begin. So start small and grow those steps. Come up with a solid plan to do it from Stephen. Be persistent and don't give up. Thanks, Linda. Go ahead with the program despite resistance. Sometimes seeing is believing. I'm actually in a situation right now in Houston where that's exactly where we are. We've planned a very big evening in the early part of November, and it's supposed to be a multidisciplinary look at some environmental issues we have here. The environmental community is actually pulled out. The rest of us, which includes government, industry, emergency people, health professionals, will go ahead without them. In fact, we are beginning to think that it was not all of the environmentalists that pulled out, but only those who step up and dominate the conversation. So we've gone on behind that reluctant debutante, the one who does not want to participate, to do some outreach with the other environmental groups in town, and we're really having some success. So go ahead with your programs and your ideas and look for ways around that resistance. Yes, indeed. Gina says ask for forgiveness later, and you'll be given it you'll be given it. Yes, acknowledge. Thank you, Suzanne. Acknowledging the resistance. Say, I understand that this is new and different to you, but let's take another look. Encourage them to be as open as you're trying to be. Offer to do the legwork so it doesn't seem overwhelming. Sometimes I think that when people are invited to participate in an advisory panel, they understand it differently than what your intent is. They think they're being asked to do something. Well, they're not really. You're asking them to give their advice. My sense is that when people begin to advise on a new endeavor, they begin to take ownership of that. So your built-in participation comes as a consequence of your willingness to lead that group forward. Be able to clarify what outcomes of the program would be, who it would benefit. Indeed, it's going to benefit your library, too. In fact, I think some of the staffing issues might be alleviated if you have a good group of volunteers and new partners to work with. Another thing that I thought of when I was preparing for the webinar is if you really take root with this endeavor and it shows you some significant changes that you can make in the library, some of the work burden that your staff is now involved in may not be so important as it seems to be at present, because in the future the focus could change. They might become involved in other ways in the work that's going on. So give it a try and don't give up. Deal with it. How do you inspire others? How can I help inspire our staff to think creatively and imagine the possibilities? I think we've begun to touch on that. Change means taking risk and moving away from a comfort zone, and that's exactly what you're asking the staff to do. That's that fear of the unknown and how people fear the loss of control. When you step off the ladder into unknown space, there's nothing really below you that you can count on, and there's a fear of falling. The same thing is with this kind of transitional transformation that you're invited to do. Leading from an obscure place in the hierarchy. Someone said that they're way down in the food chain, that they don't know how they can get the ball rolling uphill. My suggestion to them is see what you can do from an invisible place. Start with a small cohort of people. Small changes aren't noticed right away anyway. It's what happens over the long term when those small changes take effect and grow into something much more significant. Staff will feel resistant if they're left out, so be sure that they perceive it not to be more work, but as a place to give you some advice. Include them in the discussions early on and ask for their advice and help with what you're doing. Sometimes protocols constrain enthusiasm. A couple of you mentioned that you work for state libraries and that you have a lot of protocols to follow. You're required to fill out forms, file requests, and document specifics. Those sorts of activities are really peculiar to government entities and libraries or government entities. To overcome the sense of deflation and to feel less disturbed about walking up that hill again, focus on one small but significant change, because that one small change can lead to a lot of improvements. I'd like to hear your comments on the last discussion. Can you please type a few more things into me? I enjoy reading what you're saying. An environmental scan for the community, build a case that there is an audience. Absolutely. Thank you, Dale. Dale, I think you have a lot to offer this group because I know you've got a broad background on culture. So I hope in the future that you'll be drafting some things for the fellows with some advice about multicultural groups. Create a sense of urgency with the program. Absolutely, the timing is to do it right now. We are just beginning the demographic wave of the retirement and change in the workforce. Many of the folks that I work with here in Houston are beginning to see their workforce changing dramatically, and they're very upset about it because a lot of the skills and knowledge of the retirees is going away, and the younger people that they're adding to their operations are not nearly as skilled in the history of how the manufacturing process works. So there's going to be a bridge that needs to be built, and if there's all that expertise out there in the community, you might want to draw some of it into the library. Oh, well, here's a good idea from Sarah Kelly Chase. She says, tie it to the business plan. I think that's a great idea because there is some positive benefits to the library. If you involve new people in an older demographic, that's the folks with the money, let me tell you. They are the ones that can make change happen. Someone said they're politically savvy, but they're also very knowledgeable and certainly can help in the business ideas along that line that can support your library. Set a goal for yourself. Great idea. Okay, here's something from Gina. Send to drop down all participants so everyone can see. Thank you. Yes, you're going to have, Diane says, partnerships to share resources and ideas. Excellent. You're going to have an online course on partnership. I think, is that yours, Stephen? I think it is. I know that you'll also have something on working with volunteers, and certainly the next one that you'll have is your community assessment. The community assessment that Cindy Mediavella is going to help you through in the next session, which I think starts in mid-November, will give you some ideas about the demographics and outlooks in your community. So she will give you ways to tap people that you hadn't thought of before. Come with a detailed plan. Ask for advice and get buy-in from the powers that be. That's a good idea. Sometimes I wouldn't say give them a detailed plan. I'd give them a straw man. I think that's the word for it. Perhaps a draft that creates some thinking in them and let them take it apart and put it all back together. All right, let's move on just a little. This is a graph of Kolbe's learning style. And I put this in here because someone pointed out to me very well that different people have different ways of learning. So I've also given you a resource list or a list of people, a list of Kolbe's ideas about how to tap into different experiences for your learners. Multiple methods for introducing new things. For example, someone mentioned flyers. Those are visual. Others would like things read to them or that they hear by auditory means. They listen to lectures, articles to read, pictures of successful activities. Perhaps libraries can send photos of the things that they're doing in other places that would help your particular advisory panel with their ideas, growing them. Hands-on experiential tasks for adults over 50s will help those that learn kinesthetically. The principles of multiple learning types apply to staff, boards, and friends as well as to the advisory panel. So if you're really going to take a look at these ideas about different people learning different ways, don't just apply them to your advisory panel. Realize that it's a broad, useful skill for many other parts of your life. One example is if you throw people who prefer the assimilating learning style into something that they won't be comfortable with throwing into the deep end without notes and instructions. They like to have everything kind of laid out for them. Whereas people who like accommodating methods to learn will be likely to be very frustrated if they're forced to read a lot of instructions and rules. They need to get their hands on and do it, learn by doing. I have a son-in-law, and at Christmas time if we play games, it's his job to read the instructions and then tell us or show us how to do it because most of the rest of the family don't like to read all that small print. So in what ways might you address the needs of those with different learning styles? What are the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic methods that you might have used in the past? Can you type a few of those into the chat box, please, and send them to all participants? A concrete learning experience likes looking at things as they are without changes in raw detail, so you might find that there's folks that do that as well. Abstract conceptualization, looking at things as concepts and ideas, is much more fascinating to this kind of group. Volunteers would be nice for budgets, but someone has to manage them. Yes, that's true, Rebecca, and I'm assuming that there's someone in your library that's doing that. I don't think you're going to be asking your advisory panel to work on a budget. I think you're going to be asking them for advice about things that might be suitable programs and activities that the library could support or sponsor for the users. Volunteers would be nice. I have good success by using just let's try this once or twice. Oh, that's wonderful, Clancy. It doesn't commit anybody to anything permanent. If it works, everybody's on board, and if it doesn't, there's no harm done. That's my idea of a really good experiment. Many of the 50-plus listen every morning to a certain local radio channel. That's from Sharon. So one PR contact might be worth trying to tap in. Train one volunteer and train that volunteer to recruit others. I think you have to do that, and I think that's a good idea. I first think you have to get them sold and committed to the entire process. I like the let's try it once, twice message. Indeed, yes, Mary, and I certainly do myself. Volunteers do take a bit of manage, but once you get them excited about something, they can think on their own with some monitoring. Yes. That's back to the powerful questions. I think if you ask the right questions, people really can't stop talking. So good idea there to go back and review that. Let's move on to the next slide. This is about the people thing. Well, we've really been talking about the people thing all along, haven't we? First, defensiveness. Some people are very self-protective when you open the concept of change to them. To them, change is something that they see, or that they interpret as something that needs to be fixed, something that they are responsible for, perhaps something that you don't like, especially if they are your staff or supervisors. So take a new idea not as criticism of what currently exists to them, but to make them feel blamed for your dissatisfaction. Take it to them in the question of something that you'd like them to ponder, something that you'd like, that you've thought about, that you wonder if they might give you some ideas about. Sometimes supervisors and staff are trying to protect others in the system who they think might be offended by this new change. If you expect the response to your ideas to be defensive, take very small steps to build in a rationale for what you're suggesting. Involve them early in the process by asking their sense of the situation, and let them tell you some things that might need fixing before you move forward. Align yourself with those needs and build on them. Ask for advice before making suggestions for change. Another approach is to gather advice from those they respect and take it to them. Use it as a starting place for discussion. Now let's look at disruptiveness. When I'm faced with a disruptive person in a group, and generally there's one or two in every group, a technique that I've used is to move closer to that person. So sometimes I find myself getting up out of my chair and simply walking over toward where the person who is making the interruptions, throwing them out into the conversation space. I place myself between him or her and the other group, and not with my back to them, but just as a signal that I'm looking elsewhere for the conversation to begin. If it's really something difficult, I may touch the person on the shoulder. I don't know what your protocols are in the library for reaching out in that kind of way, but I'm quite comfortable in doing it in the groups that I work with. These groups are generally, well, I've got some that are as small as 6 or 8 people, and I have some that are as large as 50, so it varies. but it's sometimes needed if you really want to keep your program keep your agenda going. Another thing you can do is point to the agenda and say, well, we agreed when we set our ground rules that we were going to share the time equally and that we wouldn't interrupt each other. So let's keep those in mind, and I'm going to ask John or Mary to chime in now and let that kind of remind everybody and not just the individual that that's what's helping, what's needed to help. Are there other suggestions you can provide to deal with people, the people thing? Can you type in some things into chat that's worthy of everybody knowing about? I came up with this idea of the SOPs, the same old people syndrome. Well, it's good to have some that carry the library's history in their DNA, but I really encourage you, in fact, I almost insist that you find new additions to the process, because those will enrich the discussion and reduce the burdens on the same old people. Another thing to think about is people wait to be invited. So it may not be that you depend on the same old people, but it's because they're convenient, and you might have to put a little energy into looking for others. So ask your colleagues to recommend a newcomer, or ask someone that's always there to bring a friend with them. Ask partner organizations to include their clients and customers in what you're doing. Grow the group by asking powerful questions that lead to involvement. What would you do if, and let the group answer that question? Or how would you approach the something, and the hook will be set. So what are your thoughts on how to deal with difficult people in your real life situations? Explain to him how programs will help make jobs easier because you're enhancing existing offerings. Let's see, good point. Sorry, I'm reading your comments. I feel free fruit is actually a good idea. This is from Elizabeth. Cookies and some sort of a beverage, coffee and donuts. There's any kinds of ideas that can encourage people to participate. I find, especially in the groups that I do work with here in Houston, that sometimes oftentimes there is a conflict to deal with, but when people share food, it really changes the atmosphere of the meeting. I once had a group come in from a northern city to a local southern group meeting, and I hadn't realized that this was when I really started facilitating in the early years. Well, the Southerners, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, were really quite comfortable having a meeting around lunch. So their chatter was quite informative, and they learned from each other a bit. And I pondered the question of why the people who were the guests from the northern city were not so anxious to participate, but when dessert was gone, they got a little bit more verbal. Well, one of my southern group members who happened to be from the north told me after the meeting that sometimes people just from the north just don't believe that it's the right thing to do to eat at a business meeting. Well, your advisory panels are not exactly going to be business meetings. The library has business meetings. Your advisory panel is going to be quasi-informal and quasi-business. They will be giving you advice about business. So I think that it's really a good thing to do to have a little bit of refreshments, especially in a meeting newcomers in a meeting of newcomers. That's a good way to break the ice, pun intended. Be careful about the senior labels and focusing on groups that identify as seniors. They're an important part. Absolutely. I would encourage you to include some not seniors in this advisory group. Not seniors also have families that have senior members. So they might have ideas about how you can tap into their family members for advice. Outreach is a cliche word. Yes, it is. Outreach is a cliche word now, just like I'm using the word conversation for discussion because I think that gives a more congenial way of thinking about things. I think if you get on board with fellow librarians and talk about this, you all will find some common ways to do this. Do an activity that's fun at staff meetings. Here's one from Bill to all participants. Advice is critical, but don't look at the ideas that people might think of to suggest. You're not looking for ideas that are, advice-only ideas. You're looking for a touch from them or information from them about what their real-life situations are, because those will give you some thoughts about how you can respond to those real-life situations that they're in, and they haven't given you any advice at all. Marshall said he made a short presentation at his library at their monthly meeting that excited them about the fellowship and they want to hear more about it. So maybe that's one way to begin if you're having some staff difficulties, is to make a presentation about what you're doing and tell them your plans forward and ask them to respond to those. Always keeping people in the loop is a good thing. Interagency group, I don't know about that one, but representatives from different organizations, that's part of your building this outward bent advisory group, is to find those partners in other organizations that you can share space with, share resources with, and build a new sort of community context for the library. Thank you, Mary. She said Cindy's community assessment course starts on November the 2nd, and she guarantees it's a great course. Now, here's one. Kevin, I thank you for this. Not all staff is resistant. Some of you have staffs that are very supportive. If you do, I would encourage you to get them to contribute to the online or the fellows discussion list, because they can help you see how things are important to them and why they're supporting the program. We have diminishing staff at libraries who are able to implement programs. My strategy is going to be to enhance programs. That was one of the things I thought of early on and may not have added to your coursework, is that don't start from scratch. If you can have some programs that look like they've still got life in them, maybe you reshape what you already have to include something that would serve midlife adults as well as the population it's designed to serve. So I'm not asking you to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm just asking you to warm up the bathwater. Let's see, here's some more. How do we advertise the programs? I really don't like the term adult program. Any suggestions? What would you all suggest is another way to target the audience that you want to invite to this? I'm always fond of word of mouth and bring a friend. Kevin Bacon to offer, is this a program or a presentation? I'm not sure what that question means. Kevin, can you tell me a little bit more? These are cute. Okay, people, defensiveness and disruptive board members. I'm going to move on to the next one. And here we are at group member types. This is kind of fun. This comes from my psychology work. In every group, there's a typology that develops. In families, it's sometimes associated with first order. For example, the firstborn leader, like the presidents were firstborn, so you know that they are expected in the family system to go out and conquer the world. The middle child, or the second child, is the imp, and of course he's got to contradict the first child to make his way in the world. He's a mischief maker who competes continually with number one. The middle child and the baby, of course, depending upon the numbers of siblings, can all turn out to be quite different characters too. Does the baby whine and wail all the time, the latecomer that gets everything, at least in the other siblings' eyes? These are typical behaviors that you can look at any family and sort of identify, but they also happen with groups. There's a range of characters that you could encounter in any advisory group or any meeting group. Each one has characteristic behaviors, and each one needs a different type of facilitation. So let me walk through a few of those with you, and I want you to tell me, if you can, some of the characters you've had in some of your groups and how you address their needs. First of all, let's talk about the silent type. This one appears to be withdrawn and not really involved. That person may be shy or not confident in what they have to say or think that the rest of the people are smarter than they are. They probably listen well and have ideas, but they're not ready to say them yet. They think that what they have to say isn't valued and perhaps not wanted if the rest of the group is jabbering on with enthusiasm. So you have to watch for those people and single them out and facilitate them by asking for their input. Another option that you can use, ask them specifically, Charles, what are you thinking? We haven't heard from you, Charles. Do you have anything you might add to this conversation? Or Charles, what do you think about so-and-so? Another option for you is to break them in small groups. Sometimes folks that are shy in a large group and don't want to stand up and speak out or sit down and speak out are much happier in a dyad or a triad, groups of 2 or 3. It's much easier for them to converse that way. Then you can ask for feedback from that small group to get their ideas out on the board. Also remember them how important their gifts are and why you invited them to attend anyway. They're there for a reason, and remind them of what that reason is that you brought them into the meeting. You might want to facilitate through a brainstorming method, and this is one that one of you referred to in the online coursework. There's a name for it, but you really don't need the name to be able to use it. What I do is I ask the group a question, hopefully a very powerful question, and I give them a few minutes to sit down and think to themselves, and I've given them something to write with, and then I ask them to write their ideas down, as many as they can in 5 or 10 minutes. And I give them a quiet 5 or 10 minutes. Well, the brain does not like quiet. The brain likes stimulus. So they will begin to write, and sometimes they'll dry up. The writing will stop, and you can see them. That period of quiet, that silence, very much like what you've experienced with me in this webinar, gives people time to think, and they'll start writing again. So after the time is up, you go around the room, and one by one you ask them for their top contribution to the discussion. That way everybody's contributing, and everybody has their ideas down on paper in some form. You can make 2 or 3 rounds doing this and then ask them for their feedback sheets. You might find new things in there that didn't come to the top when you pulled out all the answers, but it's a good way to help those silent types to get their conversations into the mix. Another one that you might encounter, and I think some of you mentioned this in your online work, is the know-it-all. This one is extremely confident that his point of view or her point of view is the best one. They've always got an answer. They always speak up. They never fail to give a comment. They're very imposing and very, I don't want to say domineering, but you certainly know when they're there. Sometimes they like to rationalize or intellectualize. They like to hear themselves think out loud. Well, how do you facilitate that kind of a character? Compliment them on their insight. Reinforce that you think that they are right on target with their willingness and support. But then you stop and you ask them, I think it's time to hear from some others. I know that what you've said is going to be added into the mix, but let's hear from some other folks. Remind them of the value of their comments and ask them then not for what they are imagining or thinking, but for what they've had practical experience with. Sometimes that slows them down because they're in their head and not really in their kinesthetic thinking mode. Then there's the doubter, the one that's sort of the negative pole in the group, the minimizer. This is the one that needs to be convinced. Rather than seeing opportunity, he sees a threat. Rather than seeing the glass half empty, she sees it half full, or opposite, half empty instead of half full. There's a constant sort of lingering negativity in this particular individual. Well, when they do pipe up with something positive, affirm it, and try to diffuse their critical statements with a positive statement from someone else. Get others to give objective data, not just imaginary things. So try and move their comments more into the fact-based thing. Ask them to give consideration before evaluating. I learned from one colleague of mine who worked a lot in groups that when he asked people's input or opinions, or they're trying to work towards consensus, he insisted that before they gave a negative comment, they had to give 2 positive ones, because the negative ones are always the ones that come out the easiest. So first he would say, I want your 2 best thoughts, your 2 good ideas, and then you can say whatever else you want to. So that's another technique for using, for working with the doubter. So can you give me a few ideas from your experience how you've handled different characters in any group meetings that you've attended that might work well for the advisory panel. So type in your answers into the chat. What other characters have you encountered in your group experiences? There's another one here that's kind of famous in many groups, and that's the eager beaver. This is the impatient one. Wants to rush the decision, has a lot of energy, wants to get things going, doesn't want to think about it too much, just likes to get the ball rolling. So what you have to do with this particular fellow or girl is to give them a task. Give them something to do, something specific. Tell them it takes longer to reach a consensus, and that they need to give time for thorough deliberation. Help them to see the big picture and not just the part that they have found the solution to. So let's see what I'm getting here on the chat, because you all are responding. We have had training on the platinum rule, the ideas, powerful and fun personality types. Oh my goodness, Jenny, that sounds good. The platinum rule and the ideas, ideas, power, fun, and feelings. I think I'm going to have to look that one up. It's a new one to me. The use of stopping and silence works for me in discussion in classrooms or a group which has lost focus. Always difficult characters in any group. You get to know your enemies, and it helps you to anticipate their reactions and head them off, absolutely. But that doesn't happen at first. When you form this group, you're going to find that your first few meetings are really going to kind of set a tone for the rest of the group. There's an old saying that you hear that, I'm not going to repeat it here, it's not worth it. But anyway, the founding fathers or the founding mothers or the founding parents seem to establish a model for the group. So in your first few meetings, try and diffuse the characters that would be unfortunate to keep on board, and try and supplement or enlarge the characters in that group that are going to be the most helpful. Any more ideas on, the rabbit chaser in a book group that it calls the rabbit chaser? Ask them specific questions on the book, so you have to make them a focus. It would be helpful to know about their learning styles, too, and where they're coming from. Absolutely. You might, I think one of the things that I haven't thought to tell you is about the first meeting, the introductory meeting where you finally pull this advisory panel together and you've worked with them and you're going to launch the group, and hopefully you'll be developing the mission statement, the ground rules, and the operational agreements for your group. How you begin that meeting is to spend a lot of time, in fact, the whole meeting, letting people introduce themselves. Because once they put that character out there and they're going to introduce only the good parts of themselves, that's the character you want to show up every time. So use your powerful question techniques and ask them some really deliberative questions about why are they there? What do they find interesting about this endeavor? What do they think what do you think their gift is that they're bringing to the advisory panel? What are their hopes and expectations? Over time, you're going to hear a lot about their fears and concerns, but focus that first meeting on a high level of getting acquainted and establishing the rapport, the kind of talk you want in the group. Let's see if you sent me some more good ideas. I don't like the eye roller. Oh, that's if you're one-on-one with folks. You can absolutely, and I really wish I could see all of your faces now. The eye roller or the one that kind of huffs and puffs and folding their arms across their chest is a defensive mode. Something has happened that they don't like. And they're unwilling to tell you about it. Where are you coming from? Keep people busy and make them busy with the chore while writing down ideas. How to know, one idea is just to know how not to invite difficult people to your advisory panels. You don't know when you're beginning to round up your panel members who's going to be difficult and who isn't. Sometimes systems develop in unexpected ways, and you might have invited someone that you think is going to be great, and they turn out sort of to be a rotten apple in the barrel. I've also had groups that I get started, and it turns out over time that one or two particular individuals find that the work of the group is not what they really thought it was going to be. If I see that coming on, I will talk to them about it. I will open the door to them to move on to do other things. There's no point in keeping people on board who willingly would walk away. So I'm not opposed to your having one-on-one conversations with people that seem to be uncomfortable with the goals and aims of the advisory board. Here's one that says, always thank people for their comments. Absolutely, because they're there of their own, volition, and their input, even if their input is not something necessarily that you expected or wanted to hear, it is certainly something that's part of the reality and the context in which you're going to be working. Okay, let's move on to the next slide and see where we're going the next time. Okay, here's the limitations that you presented me with, and I'm going to kind of zip through some of these quickly. One is library size. The library has no space, so go outside, find an off-site location, work with a partner organization, meet at a Starbucks or a coffee shop for an hour or two. Get outside because you don't have space, but also get outside because it changes the environment in which you're having a conversation. Here's one, staffing shortage. Work with your advisory panel to find new hands for small tasks, or grow initiatives that do not require staff. Remember, advice is to listen and respond to. It's not a command performance for your staff. So staff need not assume that all the action items that come up are the ones that they have to hop on. And you're going to have other courses along the next year, I think, of your fellowship. They're going to give you great ideas about working with volunteers and how to form those partnerships. Okay, funding and cost are especially important during the economy that we're now living in. But there are many activities that you can undertake without great expense. Focus on the people and their needs and interests and aim for activities rather than tangible products. You don't have to shift everything in the library to meet the needs of adults, of midlife adults. There are things that you already have that you might use in a new and different way. Or borrow technology. Do a bring your own session where they bring their own books or literature or handwork or whatever your program is going to do that the library does not have to supply, such as a brown bag lunch or a cookie exchange or a book swap. I think there's a lot of ideas out there if you all just tap into each other's resources. If distance is an issue, and I travel miles sometimes in Houston. Houston's 600 and something square miles, about like Los Angeles. So I serve the whole Texas Gulf Coast, and I do a lot of driving because I find that there's conversations that need to happen in the location where they're located and not out of a central area. So rotate the meetings or communicate via technology. Set up a blog, a listserv, or a chat group, but be sure at least to have face-to-face time occasionally. It's important to know your colleagues and to know their communities. So get out of your library and go visit around. Have tours. Take your advisory group on a tour, perhaps of some sort of an activity center that you're thinking about partnering with. Time at the library. You may have to meet after hours or during lunch or for breakfast. Having food and refreshments for meetings creates that congenial atmosphere that we've spoken about before. And the tax issue. Don't do anything to raise taxes. This is a concern and it's a universal whale. If something's worth doing, it's worth the cost of doing it. For adults 50 plus, you may find greater benefit for the library in the long run than the cost of any program. So don't project the funding as the reason that you can't. Project the opportunity as the reason that you should. Think out of the box and keep leading away from the dollars in the wallet and into the needs and interests of your clients. What would you like to ask, add, or advise? I'll repeat your advice and questions as you type them in. And I see something here from Dale. He agrees that it's important to learn to work with different characters. And it's important to remember that even though they may be obnoxious, they have legitimate ideas and concerns. Here's one with a a board that ranges from in-charge person to one that absolutely, you get them from outspoken to silent. That's when you need paper and pencil and take things down and do it at home and put down their priorities in people. Okay, I want to show you this one slide here because it sort of tells the story of your work ahead. I've also provided for you books, websites. Remember that you are your own best resources, and I am available to you as you need. You all have my contact information. I will be along writing with this course until October, late October. I will respond to those of you that are just chiming in and have just begun to start your coursework, and I will probably be available to you throughout your fellowship. So don't tune me out, turn me on. Here's the last slide I want to show to you, and it's about the transformation path. It says it shows you that the path for transformation isn't straight. There may be side roads, detours, and pauses in the process. When you enter the path by discovering the problem, see it as an opportunity and a challenge that causes your organization to look at itself. Part of the journey consists of looking back at the changes over time and marking their effect on people. What has happened in response to those changes? Libraries now aren't the libraries they were years ago. The library never is the same as it's always been. So what's changing? What changes are affecting your libraries now? How will you fulfill its present purpose? What's the content of the library? Thank you. I look forward to seeing you online and for all participation. And I